Anai kaulu vehi kapoli Hawaii. Holo holo mai hole Ikaini likini No ke kahe ana haku Haina
Actually, my first trip to Kauai, I was about 9 years old. Didn't know that Kauai had electric. I'm growing up then on Niihau with lantern or no light at all. But Kauai came into our, as I was growing up, which is my home today.
My yellow changeling reveals herself through the day, enchanting moments with you makes me love you. Niihau, how hey ya Henani hie hie oi kela kela kahini nuiha o kukuai Henani hie hie oi kela kela kahini nuiha o kukuai Oh my ko aloha ilene iau iko luhano ahime hameha Oh my ko aloha ilene iau iko luhano ahime hameha Iluna mo'aua
Between Kahi, the one we just came across, its shallowest area is about 2,700 feet below sea level, and we know that the islands have sunk about 3,500 feet there, which means that at one time there may have been a partial land bridge between Kauai and Niihau 4 or 5 million years ago, so not recent. And if there was anything living on the islands that walked, it could have maybe walked across. But there really wasn't anything living here that walked on land that much. Maybe even the flightless birds hadn't even developed some swimming around. The other thing is interesting to add to that, besides just the water depth, is the origin of the volcanic mountains that we're on. On Kauai, you can see this blue dot right here, blue spot. That's the densest part of the volcano, where the core of the sediment, the lava coming up through the island, came up, or a vent came up and then it spread out to make the whole island. And that was mapped based on density measurements, gravity measurements across the island. And you can see that right now it's actually more in the center of Niihau Basin, which is actually a big depression, than it is up on a big ridge. The actual crater that created Kauai is no longer visible because the island has broken apart so much and reformed that you don't really see that vent. What's really interesting is that the core, the center of Niihau, actually is in the middle of the channel between the two islands. And you wonder, why would that be way out there in the middle? It's because, and we'll go around later on, we'll see more the cliff along the eastern part of the island here, that big cliff is what you see mainly from Kauai. And that's a large fault escarpment. You can see these lines here where the whole island basically broke and slid away into the seafloor. And you see on Kauai, the big broad area here, which I call the Mana Plain or submarine platform, that kind of built over the top of part of Niihau. So these are all forming at about the same time. They grow up, they're really heavy, they fall apart, they slide away, build back up, they interfere with each other. So that's why you can really think of this as one big complex of volcanoes. Very likely, Kauai and Niihau could have been erupting at about the same time, or within a mere few 100,000 years. Because that's geologic talk, and we talk about that sort of time. The other thing is, later on, probably won't pull the diagrams out, but we're going to be going along the Pali on Kauai, which is the cliffs along the northwest side of the island. And the cliffs in Hawaii kind of have two major different kinds of origin. On the one I just mentioned on Niihau, is where the whole mountain will break in half and slide away, part of it. That'll leave a hanging wall, which forms sea cliffs in there. Now that's really obvious because you've got a lot of debris that's south of this area. The seafloor is very rough, big chunks that have slid off. The interesting thing about Nepali, though, is we don't have any evidence of landslide at all off of Nepali. And so how could you form a cliff if you don't have a big landslide? Well, this also faces the North Pacific, and we get those giant swells that come in every winter, up to 30, 40, 50 feet sometimes. And that wave energy has actually eroded that cliff back. And we see evidence of that because you get submarine canyons that are cutting down from the platform into the deep ocean, and there's no debris at all from landslide. So it's another way. So the Pali and Kauai is mostly formed by wave erosion, whereas on Niihau it's formed by faulting and rebuilding. So anyway, any questions? I want to keep this brief. So
What is that missing terrace?
well, that's missing because there was a terrace there, and Kauai formed over the top of it. So that's why you can't find it. And you can see on the south side of Kauai, this edge right here is the edge of the island when it was first forming, when it was where the big island is now. On the south side, that edge is missing. But you look down dip, you see all this rubble on the seafloor. That's because that whole side of the island broke and slumped away. So studying the seafloor in detail is really what we need to use to figure out the origin of all these volcanic mountains. Otherwise, you're just dealing with 1% of the mountain and trying to interpret the whole rest of it. So this imagery, which has been available now for 10 or 15 years, has really helped us understand all the Hawaiian Islands. And we have that imagery all the way out to Midway for the whole archipelago as well. Yes?
So, talking about how Kauai was formed, I'm assuming that Niihau was formed different because it has Lehua crater and Nihoa. Are these all parts of the Lehua and the Niihau eruption, or is this part of the Kauai eruption?
That's a really good question. Basically, there are these things called shield volcanoes. We call them a shield because they're like the warrior shield. The shape, they're very broad. And they form that way because they're made of liquid magma, kind of like what's going on right now in Kilauea on the Big Island. You've got mostly lava coming out and forming layers. They make a very broad volcano. The explosive part would make a steeper one. So all the volcanoes in Hawaii have different stages. The shield stage is when it's forming the big structure. But then on top of that, in Kauai, for example, we've got several little cinder cones that have erupted on it as well. And so on Niihau, you've got the main structure, and then on top of that, like Lehua, is a later stage, more of explosive. So this volcano behind me formed by an explosive eruption where ash and cinder were thrown high in the air and settled down And so it made like a cone-shaped layer cake. And so when you cut through it, you can see all these different layers going in different directions. Because each one of those explosive events formed a layer. It'd be like taking a handful of sand and letting it settle through your hand and make a little cone shape. So it just builds up in that kind of shape. And because of the difference of the eruptions at different stages, you get coarser or finer debris, which makes the different layers in there. And it's referred to as a tuff cone, the Hua tuff, because a lot of that was hot when it still settled back down and it welded itself to the sediment that was below. So it's kind of cemented together. And it's, by tough, meaning it's hard to break up and so on like that. But it's like a cinder cone. These things can form in the matter of weeks or months or less, whereas the volcano itself takes millions of years, hundreds of thousands of years to form. So it's very short-lived. And they're relatively young compared to the rest of the island. The oldest rocks there's only been one rock dated on this island. It's 4.9 million years old. The island's probably a little older than that, so more sampling would give us an older age. So the main volcano formed 4 or 5 million years ago. This feature here probably would date in order of a few 100,000 years at the oldest. Now those are big numbers, but it's a big difference between millions and it takes 1,000. The point is that you're seeing different stages of eruption, and they change their style with time. As they get younger, the lava's coming from a different place. You've got more water in the magma chamber, and it's more explosive than it is effusive. Effusive is when the magma comes out and flows down. Effusive eruptions are like mostly Hawaiian volcanoes. And that's one of the unique things about Hawaiian volcanoes is they're mostly made of layers of lava, not big explosive events. But they do have an explosive phase, and that's what we're seeing behind us. Now, you may notice in a few places where it looks like the angles of the layers suddenly change to a different direction. And there's 3 major phases here where you get layers like this, and all of a sudden you have a layer comes across the top of it. That's probably where it erupted for a while, and then it slowed down and stopped. And then a later eruption came up, and the ash was put in a different place. So, but overall, it's a relatively young feature. That's 1,600 miles, and 1,300 miles of that are islands from Kauai, Big Island to Midway. And then you may or may not know that then the whole island chain goes underwater, and because they're all sinking until they finally give way to sea level. Those are called seamounts. Those are called the emperor seamounts. And then at an age of about 50 million years old, they make a bend, called dog leg bend, like a dog's leg bend like that. And they go another 1,600 miles up to near the Kamchatka Peninsula of Russia. That's in the very northern Pacific. And so the oldest ones there are about 80 million years old. Maiji Seamount near Kamchatka. To put that on North American continent, you would start in Miami, go to about Las Vegas, and then north to Alaska. So that would be the length of that. So it's 3,600 miles long, I think. So it's very long. It's the longest mountain chain in the world. And only part of it is above sea level.
In all of those times when we were little and we would come over for Christmas on Niihau, they have huge pa'inas at Christmas time in celebration of the holidays, and we would gather all kinds of foods and things. And one of the guests asked me if there's a store on Niihau, and I said, no, there's no store on Niihau. There's storerooms, but no store on Niihau, because the barge will come in, dependent upon, again, the weather and the ocean conditions, and bring in supplies. So whatever supplies you have to malama and you take care of. So when we were growing up, we used to swim all this area on the coast. And I remember very vividly my tutu Nakaahiki, my grand tutu man, taught us how to swim. So we would stay in Polihale basically the whole summer, months on months on months, and just live at the beach on Polihale. And they would even, if they had jobs and work and things, go to work down at the base, the missile facility right there from where we were camping. And they would come back in the night and they would do it all over again and go to work again the next morning, all from Polihale. And that's where I learned how to swim. So he had a little rowboat, and of course, a big part of our diet was fish. So he would throw net, and he would kiloi upena,
over there?
And we would be the ones that he would, tell, go get the net, ush the net, or go get kiloi the net, ki'i the net, bring it in or throw it out. And Papa Benny was an expert fisherman. He learned from my to his mother all the names of the different spots by Nanina and Pohakupili and Kauai Hoa and all of those spots on Niihau that the fish would come to Kalai Kamanu, all the old names that you don't really see anymore. And what happened is, in his time he shared, but if you didn't have that moments with him, the knowledge was lost. So I'm so grateful to my ancestors that they were able to show and teach us that. So it's here on Miloli'i that we learn how to swim, we learn how to fish and sustain for that. And then, as we got older, we began to go more into the region that we now call Napali, and that area, where is Nualolo and Nualolo Aina, Nualolo Kai proper, and then Kalalau was always renowned to be kind of like what Kauai High and Waimea Kamuela is to some parts of Hana and Hana, vice versa, like the bread basket. And we would bring back food and things, from Kalalau and go on the little boats, the little bit more motorboats or the Zodiacs when we got older, to Niihau and give the family rations and supplies and things of that nature. So it was really a close-knit community. If you knew the families and you knew the people who lived in Napali, in Kalalau, the Aipiolanis, the Malamas, the Kuelus, the Kualuas, all of a lot of our family members went all back to Niihau to help feed the other family members there, because they knew that they had much less resources available to them in that Aina versus us over here. So Kauai was, always home, but we knew that we had to take care of our families and our loved ones there. Like Auntie Lou shared with you guys all this morning, the families were very, very close and knew, one another more intimately. Now, the families, all we know is the family on the computer is a Facebook. So we need to reshift and get those gears back and do things more like this and, have our Ohana just really spend time together. So I was very blessed and fortunate to have had that rearing. And then again, learning hula in our family wasn't, something that we could choose or a task that we could, neglect, because what it taught us was the genealogies, it taught us the place names, it taught us the conditions and the qualities of the land, the water, the rain, the wind, all of the elements, all of those things that, are so beautifully composed into those mele, those oli, that we are able to talk about and sing now. Just like this breeze is Q wind, it's like a northwestern gale, it's like a pleasantly wild wind, so it's not like blowing in your eye like when you're at Makahuena on the South Shore, where it's making your eyes enraged just to look out into the sea. This is like a cool, teasing wind. It just makes you feel very nice. So, mahalo for listening and sharing. And
that's actually what we call kahua, or a community gathering place or community ceremonial ground. Some people call it a heiau. It is. There is a little smaller heiau up behind it, but it was functioning depending on the chief and depending on what was going on. There's also a little pond that's right next to it, next to the punavai. There's a well that's right there, and the pond. We believe that they used to bring canoes here and put them in the pond to get sanctioned or to be blessed before they went out to the North Pacific, the North Hawaiian Islands, like Mukumanamana and Niihau. And we believe that this was a big gathering spot for that. The last royal Hawaiian that ever slept here was actually King Kalakaua. So he actually laid his head down on the ground here, and we know where the area is.
Ha'ini likini. No ke kahea